Welcome to a moment of theological reflection. In the midst of the Stamp Act crisis of 1765, Congregationalist minister Jonathan Mayhew republished a discourse on unlimited submission. The Stamp Act crisis was the event that kicked off a decade of agitation leading up to the American Revolution. Mayhew had originally published this political sermon in 1750 on the anniversary of the execution of King Charles I, but it was even more relevant to the Stamp Act. Royalists had famously used Romans 13:1, "Let every soul be subject unto higher powers, for there is no power but of God," to justify the divine right of kings and to condemn resistance to royal authority. Now the same arguments used by Charles were being made again by the supporters of George III against the American colonies resisting the Stamp Act. In his sermon, Mayhew wrote that these verses were dependent on Romans 13:3, that we are subject to higher powers only when rulers are not a terror to good works but to the evil. When a ruler violates this agreement, it breaks all bonds of tribute, custom, fear, and honor. In other words, he argued for a social compact similar to those proposed by Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Today, people are using the same verses again to argue that it's a Christian's responsibility to submit to government in all circumstances. Yet Mayhew reminds us that submission is required only to the extent that governments help rather than harm believers. We must always be careful that resistance is justified, and we must return to submission when the government does good. But there are times when we have the right to resist evil. I'm Damon Manders for the Huntsville Theological Institute.